You ever feel your heartbeat in your teeth? It's a hollow, thudding ache that shifts your focus inward until every nerve in your jaw aches with anticipation. That's exactly what happened the moment Karina Ellison slid the HR document across the conference table, her fingers barely grazing the paper's edge before she snapped it into place like a gavel striking down a verdict. I watched the heads of operations swivel in unison, their eyes widening as they recognized the stark, typewritten ultimatum puppied beneath the fluorescent glare. Accept the 60% pay cut, or I'll find someone who will. Silence roared in that room, a vacuum sucking the oxygen from my lungs. My pulse drummed in my molars, but somehow I managed not to flinch. Her words came out cold and measured, each syllable a calculated blow delivered in front of the entire staff. Her kingdom. Cold, public, humiliating. Karina's voice never wavered, never dipped into hesitation. She didn't need to. This was her power move, a demonstration of everything she'd built: respect, fear, authority. Yet they didn't know that I was her husband. Not officially. That fact was part of her design. Control behind closed doors, invisibility in public. I'd watched her sculpt our shared world around my absence, turning me into a ghost at our own dinner table, and there she was, doing it again. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed, though beneath the surface I was raw with outrage. My mind raced through every memory: late nights drafting our first client proposal, the triumph when we closed that Series A round, the way we used to steal kisses in the stairwell before deadlines swallowed us whole. Back then, we were equals, partners. Now, here I stood as collateral, evidence of her ruthless ascent. When her gaze flicked to me, calm, imperious, I responded with a measured, "I'll need 24 hours to consider." My tone held just enough restraint to mask the tsunami inside. Every eye in the room bore into me, assessing, waiting for a sign of weakness. They didn't understand. None of them knew I'd once been her confidant, her co-conspirator in every late-night brainstorming session. They saw a colleague, maybe an underperforming executive whose time had passed. They didn't see the husband she dismantled piece by piece, the man who had supported her climb to the top while she sharpened her claws. But now, as I watched my words echo against the glass walls, I felt a quiet shift inside, the cracking of something I thought was unbreakable. Something in me broke in that moment, too. Karina's lips twitched, almost a smile. She stood, smoothing the lapels of her tailored blazer, and announced the meeting was adjourned. Around me, chairs scraped back, and a low murmur rippled through the room as colleagues gathered their briefcases and coffee cups. I didn't move. I watched them file past, their conversations hushed, as if they were afraid to disturb the moment's aftermath. Their shocked glances cut sharper than any blade. I allowed myself a slow breath before packing my laptop and notes, every motion deliberate, like a man who wants to show he still controls his own destiny, even if only in that small gesture. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, the corridor lights felt harsh and accusing. I closed my eyes for a split second and pictured Lucas, our 11-year-old, asleep in his room, blissfully unaware that his father was being publicly castrated in the name of corporate strategy. There was anger, yes, but beneath it was a deeper tremor of betrayal, an ache for the life we once shared, for the partnership I believed we had. Yet I knew that path had closed the moment she chose to humiliate me in front of people who would never care if I existed or not. I descended the elevator, pressing the lobby button with an almost violent snap, and as the doors opened, I realized I couldn't go home, not yet. I wasn't ready to face her tonight, to pretend everything was normal over dinner. I ducked into the stairwell instead, my footsteps echoing on concrete, and leaned against the cool wall. My fingers itched for my phone, but I resisted. Instead, I focused on steadying my breath, grounding myself in the moment. I replayed her words, the way she looked at me with that flicker of triumph in her eyes. I'll find someone who will. Someone who would take my place, who would be grateful for scraps. But that wasn't me anymore. The man who sat in that boardroom didn't tremble under her gaze. He didn't cower. He met her challenge with a request for time, a luxury she rarely afforded herself or anyone else. In that request, I felt the spark of something else, hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for escape and reinvention. I pressed my back to the wall, closed my eyes, and made a decision to answer her ultimatum not with defeat, but with defiance. I straightened up, squared my shoulders, and stepped out of the stairwell into the quiet hum of the parking garage. The cool air hit me like a shock, and I inhaled, tasting freedom for the first time in years. I would give her 24 hours. I would consider her cut, her terms, her power, but I would also consider my own options. And when I re-entered that glass fortress tomorrow, I wouldn't be the same man who walked out tonight. Something had shattered alongside my composure, but what emerged was stronger, a conviction that there was a life beyond her empire, and I intended to build it on my own terms. In that dark garage, with the echo of my footsteps fading, I touched my thumb to my teeth, feeling the rapid pulse beneath. Yes, I still felt my heartbeat there, but it no longer held fear. It held determination. I had 24 hours to choose. And I was going to choose me. We were just two names on a startup's payroll back then, Karina and me, young, hungry, and unaware of how ambition can rot the foundation it's built on. Silver Systems didn't have glossy logos or multi-million-dollar contracts at the time. Just a vision and a loft office above a bakery that made the whole place smell like sourdough and dreams. We were a ragtag bunch, chasing cloud infrastructure innovation like it was oxygen, and somehow in the middle of the chaos, we found each other. It started as late-night burrito runs, then turned into stolen kisses by the printer, and before I knew it, we were co-writing code, goals, and a life. Karina was fire, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. She saw ladders everywhere and climbed them 2 rungs at a time. I admired that at first. I encouraged it, supported her moves, took notes during pitch rehearsals, edited her presentations, even let her practice telling off underperforming engineers on me just so she'd sound fierce but fair. I wanted her to rise. I never realized she was training herself to rise alone. When she got promoted to VP of HR, I celebrated like it was my own win. She had presence in meetings, command over a room, and I found my niche in strategic partnerships. Quiet work, but critical. I built our client list from nothing: cold calls, trade shows, chasing leads that didn't want to be chased. I landed contracts that floated payroll during tight months, established relationships that the board would later call foundational to our scale. But I wasn't flashy about it. I wasn't on magazine panels or featured in Forbes' Next 100. I didn't need that. Karina did. She loved the spotlight, the applause, the LinkedIn reposts that called her visionary and disruptive. I was content with peace. She craved clout. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing us as partners and started seeing me as a prop, a placeholder, a man behind the curtain. We moved into a townhome in Rosegate once bonuses started to roll in. I remember the first night there, standing in the kitchen while Lucas napped upstairs, and she walked in wearing her silver-branded fleece, eyes sparkling from a company-wide presentation she'd just delivered. "We're building something huge," she whispered, arms wrapping around my waist. Together. I believed her. Foolishly. Because even then, the cracks had begun. She didn't ask how my meetings went anymore. She missed dinner twice a week for executive strategy calls and slowly replaced our shared calendar with her own. Our conversations drifted from personal to professional and then stopped altogether. At work, she stopped looking at me like I was her person. She looked at me like an asset, useful, but expendable. I should have spoken up. Should have pulled the ripcord when I started noticing the small humiliations, the time she corrected my report in front of the junior staff instead of waiting till we got home, or when she forgot to loop me in on a major contract negotiation even though the client had been mine. But I didn't. I told myself it was temporary, that the pressure would ease, that she'd remember we were on the same team. That boardroom meeting proved otherwise. After she slid that document across the table, with its ice-cold demand for a 60% pay cut and a threat of replacement, I replayed every compromise I'd ever made for her, every sacrifice that now sat neatly buried under her empire. This wasn't a moment of miscommunication. This was who she had become, and who she expected me to become: silent, compliant, replaceable. I drove home that day on autopilot, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the taste of humiliation still sour in my mouth. Our neighborhood looked too pristine, too polished for what I was feeling, like reality refused to match the storm inside me. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the soft glow of our living room lamp filter through the blinds. When I stepped inside, Lucas was on the floor building a Lego version of something that looked like Silver's office. He looked up and smiled. "Mom said you were in a big meeting." He didn't know. He couldn't. And that innocence punched me harder than anything she'd said. Karina was in the kitchen, heating something in the microwave. She didn't turn around. "Hey," she said, casual. like she hadn't tried to publicly amputate my career just a few hours earlier. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation. But instead, I stared at her back, at the way she moved with such certainty, like her world was untouched by the damage she left in mine. "You ambushed me today," I said finally. She paused. "Barely." Then she turned, arms crossed. "It wasn't personal. It was a strategic decision. You did it in front of them," I said, voice low. "Their staff." "Not family," she replied, coolly. "They don't know we're married. They don't need to." I blinked. "You think that makes it better?" She shrugged. "I made a call. It's not about you." And that's when I knew. It wasn't about me, not anymore. Not for a long time. I had been riding shotgun in a car she was driving straight off a cliff, and I'd been too loyal to jump out. I walked upstairs, past Lucas's drawings taped to the wall, past our wedding photo that still hung crooked on the hallway frame. I stood in our bedroom for a long time, looking at the life we built. The life she broke, one calculated decision at a time. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling shift from shadow to sunlight and felt the weight of something final settle into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. By morning, I wasn't the man who used to quietly protect her legacy. I was the man she underestimated. And I was done waiting for her to remember what we built. I was going to build something better. Without her. I couldn't stop replaying the scene. Karina's voice sharp, cold, like a blade across the back of my neck. The way the others looked at me as she did it, some with pity, some with silent relief that they weren't the target. The tap of her pen after the ultimatum. The stillness in the room as I said I needed 24 hours. And now, alone in my car, I sat parked outside our home with the engine off, fingers still gripping the wheel like I was waiting for something to crash. The house was dark except for the small porch light that flickered every few seconds, casting shadows across the front yard like ghosts pacing the grass. I didn't move. I stared at the windshield, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't know who I saw anymore. Husband, father, employee, target. And now, maybe something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in a long time, unshackled. Humiliation has a strange way of stripping things clean. You stop making excuses. You stop lying to yourself. You see things plain. Eventually, I stepped out and quietly made my way into the house. Lucas was asleep, his door cracked open just enough for the glow of his nightlight to seep through. I paused, peeking inside. He had fallen asleep with a drawing clutched in one hand, crayons scattered across his bed. I stepped in softly, eased the paper from his fingers. It was a family drawing, him in the center, Karina on the right, our dog that died 2 years ago on the left. Me? I wasn't there. Just a smudge where another figure might have gone, erased with a careless pink thumb. Maybe I'd missed too many breakfasts. Too many games. Maybe I'd made myself invisible. Or maybe I'd been made that way. I tucked the sheet on his nightstand and walked to my office downstairs. The walls were still lined with client folders, pitch decks, hand-drawn org charts from when Silvera was nothing more than a desperate group of tech optimists trying to outthink Amazon. I'd built our strategic arm from scratch. Courted clients no one else could get close to. Held on to relationships like they were rope bridges. And now? A 60% pay cut for the man who brought in a third of the company's recurring revenue. Loyalty was a currency I spent far too generously. I opened my laptop. The company org chart still sat open in a pinned tab from earlier that afternoon. My name, now attached to a strange new title, Special Consultant. It felt like a severance in disguise. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the tab. Then I opened a new one and typed 4 words, Kortenix Systems career page. Kortenix. The name had always lingered like a whisper in Silvera's corridors. Our top competitor. Sleeker, louder, better funded. They tried poaching me 3 times before, always dangling better pay, better titles, faster tracks. And I turned them down each time for loyalty, for principle, for Karina. Never again. I bypassed their careers page and pulled up my contacts instead. Jared Ortega. The name brought back a flood of memories. He'd been an intern on my team a decade ago, fresh out of grad school with more ideas than tact. I mentored him, taught him how to pitch without sounding like he was begging, showed him how to read a room. We'd lost touch when he left for Kortenix 5 years back. Now he was VP of Strategic Growth. I stared at his name for a beat longer. My mouse hovered over a message. I clicked. Jared. Long time. Hope you're well. I'd like to discuss something important. Are you available this week for a quick conversation? I hit send. Closed the tab. and stared into the quiet darkness. For minutes later, I heard the ping. I leaned forward and opened it. Marcus. Damn, I hoped this day would come. You free tomorrow morning? Early. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Something real, not rehearsed or diplomatic. Name the place, I replied. We settled on Rosegate Diner. 6:30 a.m. That was Jared, early, eager, efficient. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, my fingers tingling with a sensation I hadn't felt in over a year. Possibility. Not in a vague, someday kind of way. But right now, like someone had just cracked open the window in a room where I'd been suffocating. Down the hall, I heard the muffled clatter of Karina moving in the kitchen, probably preparing her overnight oats or one of her nutrient smoothies with all the silent confidence of someone who had never been challenged. I didn't go to her. I didn't say a word. I powered down my laptop and went upstairs, stepping past the photos on the wall, vacations, awards dinners, Lucas's first birthday party. All curated moments, all frozen in time. In our bedroom, Karina was already in bed, a book on her lap. She looked up but said nothing, just returned to her reading like I was a coat on a rack, something she kept around but no longer noticed. I changed in silence, slid into bed without brushing against her, stared at the ceiling, heart still echoing against my ribs. She didn't ask about the meeting. She didn't ask how I felt. She never did. And tomorrow, I would meet with the man she once laughed off as junior talent. I would sit across from someone who remembered what I taught him, not just about business, but about loyalty and grit. And I would listen to what he had to offer, not out of desperation, but with intent. I'd given Silvra everything. I gave her everything. Now, it was time to give something back to myself. Across the bridge, a new chapter was waiting. And this time, I would walk in with both eyes open. The Rosegate Diner hadn't changed since I'd last been there 5 years ago. Same cracked leather booths, same flickering neon sign above the counter, and the same waitress, Gloria, who moved like she had owned the place long before the actual owner ever signed a lease. It was the kind of place people came to disappear into routine. But that morning, before the sun even touched the rooftops, I wasn't here for routine. I was here to end one chapter and begin another. Jared was already seated when I walked in, grinning like a man who'd just found a winning lottery ticket. He stood up to hug me. Marcus, he said, slapping me on the back. I swear, I've pictured this moment more times than I'd admit to HR. I chuckled, easing into the seat across from him. I see Courtnix hasn't taken the charm out of you. Just polished it, he said, then signaled to Gloria without even glancing at the menu. Coffee for both. Black, right? Some things never changed. I leaned back, studied him a little. He'd filled out, his jaw sharper, his suit better tailored, his voice steadier. He looked like a man who finally owned the rooms he used to sneak into. And yet there was still that hint of awe in his eyes when he spoke to me, like I was the guy who pulled him out of his own shadow. Maybe I had. But today, I wasn't his mentor. Today, we were equals. So, I said, folding my hands. Let's talk. Jared didn't waste time. He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days ago, my wife had done the same thing, with threats tucked behind every sentence. But this folder? It hummed with opportunity. Senior Director of Strategic Growth, he said. 180 base. 30% bonus potential. Full benefits. Signing bonus that'll make you forget you ever got downgraded to consultant. And more importantly, he leaned in, lowering his voice. We'll fast-track you to VP in 6 months, maybe less, if even half your former clients follow you. I blinked. That's generous. No, he replied. That's overdue. I opened the folder. Neatly printed offer letter, compensation package, NDAs, standard onboarding forms. But what caught my eye wasn't what was in the folder, it was what wasn't. No non-compete clause, I said aloud. Jared nodded. We don't need it. You're not just a name on a resume. You're the reason deals close. People trust you. And trust doesn't come with an expiration date. I sipped my coffee, letting the words settle. I meant in my current contract, I clarified. Silvra. Karina had it removed last year. Said it would give me more flexible. He raised an eyebrow. You serious? I pulled out my phone, tapped through a few PDFs, and turned it toward him. Page 11. No non-compete. No client solicitation clause. No IP restrictions. Jared whistled low. She thought you'd never leave. She was wrong. He tapped the table, smirking. You know they'll try to drag you through the mud anyway. I nodded. Let them. I've bled for that company. The files I built, the trust one earned, the clients I signed, they weren't handed to me. They weren't gifted because I married into power. I earned them, and I won't lift a finger to steal a single one. You won't need to, he said. They'll call you. They'll ask where you are. They'll follow because they want to, not because you ask. The waitress brought our food. I hadn't even realized I was hungry until the smell of eggs and toast hit me. Jared took a bite, then pointed at the folder. So? You in? I didn't answer right away. I picked up the pin he'd placed neatly beside the packet. It felt heavy in my hand, not just from the metal, but from what it symbolized. Not revenge, not ego, but self-respect. After being buried in Karina's shadow, after being turned into a convenient pawn in her strategic ambitions, here was a chance to step back into the light. I signed. Jared raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. To freedom, I said. We ate in silence after that, the kind that only exists between people who understand the gravity of a moment. As we left the diner, the sky had begun to brighten, soft streaks of orange cutting through the dawn. I climbed into my car, folder in hand, and sat there for a long moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I felt weightless. Like the tension I'd been carrying in my chest for the past 2 years had finally lifted. When I got home, the house was quiet. Karina's car was gone. Early meeting, no doubt. She didn't ask where I'd gone, didn't check to see if I came home last night, didn't seem to care that we hadn't spoken since the HR ambush. I went to my office, closed the door, and pulled up the Silver Employee Handbook, the one I'd helped write. It was all still there, pages of policies, clauses, protocols. But none of it applied to me anymore. I was untethered. Still, I scanned through my own employment agreement again, just to be sure. No non-compete. No restrictions on where I worked next. Karina had assumed I'd be loyal until the end. She'd never imagined I'd have the spine to walk away, much less the leverage to land somewhere stronger. She'd unhooked my leash thinking I wouldn't move without her. Her mistake. I printed my resignation letter that night. Straightforward. Professional. No bitterness on the page, but every sentence dripped with clarity. Tomorrow, I would walk into her glass-walled office wearing the same suit I wore when we pitched Silver to its first investor. Black, crisp, poised. And this time, I wouldn't be the one begging for her approval. I'd be the one holding the final word. I wore the suit with intention. Blackwell. Tailored. The one I hadn't touched in years but never had the heart to get rid of. The one I wore when Karina and I pitched Silver to the angel investors who first gave us a shot. Back then, she had held my hand under the conference table, squeezing twice every time she got nervous. No? She wouldn't even meet my eyes across the dinner table. The irony was rich. I adjusted my cufflinks in the mirror, took a long breath, and walked out the door. The drive to Silver was quiet. Not a single song felt right, so I let the silence ride with me. I passed the same coffee shop where Karina and I used to split a bagel on early mornings. She always took the top half with the extra sesame seeds. These days, she barely spoke before leaving for the gym or another strategy call. Somewhere between ambition and titles, we stopped being a team. When I stepped into the building, I nodded at reception, then rode the elevator to the executive floor. My heart didn't race. No tremble in my hands. Just a strange calm, like I was walking into a funeral I'd already grieved. The doors opened and there she was, behind the glass wall of her office, back straight, pen in hand, dissecting some document like it owed her an apology. I knocked once. She looked up, surprised to see me. Marcus, she said flatly. I thought you were taking the day. I'm here to make a decision, I replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. She gestured without standing. Go ahead. I placed the resignation letter on her desk. No preamble, no apology, just the truth in 12-point calibri. She didn't reach for it, just stared at it like it might explode. Then she leaned back in her chair, arms crossing slowly. You're making a mistake, she said. No, I replied. I'm making a choice. There was a flicker behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. You're walking away from 14 years, she said. I nodded. 14 years where I made this company millions. 14 years where I stayed loyal even when it cost me time with my son, cost me my peace. Her tone hardened. You're not going to find another role in this market at your level. Not with your compensation expectations. Not with this economy. I smiled then. Just a little. Actually, I already have. That made her blink. Just for a second. The mask cracked. Where? Kortenix, I said. Calm. Direct. And there it was, the moment she lost control. Her body went rigid. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk like she was holding onto the ground beneath her. Kortenix, she repeated, as if the name itself was a betrayal. They offered what I'm worth. What I should have been worth here. Her voice dropped. You do realize we'll sue. I reached into my leather folder and dropped the Kortenix offer letter beside my resignation. No non-compete. No IP conflicts. No client solicitation. You forgot to protect the one person you thought would never leave. The silence was heavy. She flipped through the Kortenix contract, her eyes scanning the terms. I watched her lips press into a thin line. The woman who once used to say, "We make a great team," now calculating exactly how she lost a partner, personally and professionally. I removed the non-compete to give you room to grow, she said tightly. No, I replied. You removed it because you thought I'd never use it. Her jaw clenched. I was loyal to a fault, I continued. I passed on offers. Sat through your meetings where I was invisible. Took the back seat so you could shine. I never wanted to be the face. But when you humiliated me in front of your team, our team, you made something very clear. I don't belong here anymore. And I'm done pretending I do. She stood, finally, as if height would help her reclaim authority. This will damage our reputation. No, I said. It will damage yours. For a beat, we stood there in silence. Two people who once built something side by side, now on opposite sides of a war neither of us declared out loud. The room felt colder than I remembered. More clinical. Less hours. I built this company, she said quietly. So did I replied. And now I'm building something else. There was a finality in the way I said it. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I could tell she wanted to say more, but there was nothing left that could undo what had already been broken. I turned to leave. Marcus, she called just as I reached the door. I paused, hand on the knob. Why now, she asked. Her voice wasn't demanding anymore. It was something closer to human. I looked back at her. The woman who used to dance barefoot in our living room, who once whispered her dreams against my collarbone, who used to believe in us. Because yesterday, I said, I realized I've spent too long being loyal to someone who stopped being loyal to me. Then I opened the door and stepped out. By the time I reached my office, news had already started to ripple through the floor. Devin from legal gave me a long, unreadable look. Maria from finance stood near the coffee machine, eyes glassy. I gave her a nod. She smiled weakly and mouthed, "Thank you." I packed my things in silence. A few folders. My son's crayon drawing of a rocket ship. A coffee mug that said, "Do the work." I left the framed picture of Karina and me at last year's gala in the drawer. That wasn't a memory I needed anymore. HR pinged me before I could head out. We'll coordinate your exit documents, the email said. Please wait for security to escort you per protocol. Security. After all I'd done, after all I gave. This was how it ended. Like a threat. Like a liability. I waited. Calm. Unbothered. I didn't want a scene. I didn't need one. The security guard was polite, almost apologetic. Just protocol, Mr. Ellison, he muttered. I nodded. Of course. As we walked through the corridor, I could feel eyes on me. Colleagues trying to look busy. Screens flickering with pretend work. No one spoke, but everyone watched. And then I stepped through the glass doors of silver one final time. No announcement. No applause. Just quiet shoes on tile and a gust of wind as the doors shut behind me. But I didn't look back. Not once. The air outside Silver's building was different. Not just cooler, but freer, like the kind of breeze that lets you know you've just walked away from a fire and survived. I stood on the steps for a few seconds longer than I needed to, holding the box of my things in one arm, my resignation confirmation envelope in the other. It was strange how light it all felt. After 14 years of loyalty, I expected the weight of regret, the tug of nostalgia. Instead, I felt nothing but clarity. Devin from legal had sent me a one-line Slack message an hour before. Do you want a quiet exit strategy? I declined without hesitation. I didn't need fanfare, but I wasn't going to slink out the back door like I'd been caught stealing office supplies. I wanted them to see me leave, to feel the ripple of it. Maria from finance had been crying. She didn't say much, just hugged me fiercely and whispered. She didn't have to do it like that. She meant Karina. Everyone did. They'd seen her play her hand, wield her power in that conference room not like a leader, but like a tyrant marking her territory. And now that I was gone, they'd be watching her even more closely, waiting to see who'd be next. The security escort wasn't even necessary, but protocol demanded it. For senior staff, they claimed. What they meant was, for those whose exits hurt the bottom line. The guard walked quietly beside me, eyes fixed ahead. When we reached the elevator, he pressed the button, stepped back. I glanced at him. You draw the short straw? I asked. He gave a half smile. You're not the first executive I've walked out, Mr. Ellison, but you're the first one who left with his head held high. I appreciated that more than I thought I would. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out to a hushed room. Receptionists paused mid-call. Interns pretended to scroll through emails they weren't reading. I walked across the marble floors I used to help mop in the early days when we couldn't afford cleaning staff, back when Karina and I shared a desk and a single dream. Now she had an entire corner office, and I had the one thing she couldn't reclaim: my name, my value, and the trust of every client I'd ever worked with. I exited the building into the afternoon sun, slid the box onto the passenger seat of my car, and sat for a long while with the engine off. No calls, no emails, just stillness. Then, almost like clockwork, my phone lit up. First was Sonia Adair from Teltrix Solutions. Hey Marcus, just heard. Where are you headed? Then Marcus Doyle from Graywell International. Tell me you're staying in the industry. We want to talk. A few minutes later, Elaine Winters. The same client who once said she'd never work with anyone but Silvera. If you're leaving, I'm reconsidering our position. Let's connect soon. I hadn't pitched, hadn't even hinted. And yet here they were, calling, texting, asking where I went. Because it wasn't about the company. It never had been. They were buying me. My judgment. My relationship. The years I spent learning their business inside and out. Karina never understood that. She thought people could be managed like numbers. That loyalty could be drafted into contracts. But real loyalty isn't written down. It's earned. I replied to each one with a simple message: we'll talk Monday. I'll have something to share. Then I opened a fresh notebook. Wrote 3 words at the top of the page: Kortniks. Day 1. That night, I got home before Lucas did. He had soccer practice, and Karina had volunteered to do the pickup, probably to soften the optics, to paint a picture of domestic unity that hadn't existed in months. I sat at the kitchen table, box beside me, and took out a photo from the top. Me and Lucas at a park 2 years ago. He was holding a popsicle, his mouth stained blue, his hand in mine. I'd forgotten about this one. Karina had taken it. I remembered how she smiled at us then, genuinely. I wondered where that woman had gone. The garage door opened. I heard the car pull in, the telltale sound of Lucas kicking off his cleats before he even got to the door. He burst in a moment later, breathless. Dad, did you see my goal? Not yet, I said, standing up. But you can show me. I'm home early. His eyes lit up. You're never home this early. I will be now. He ran off to get his ball, and I turned just as Karina walked in. She looked tired. Not exhausted, just drained in that permanent way success can sometimes carve into a person. Her eyes flicked to the box on the table. So it's done, she said. It is. She nodded. They'll come after you. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. No clients solicited. No documents. You built your company on rules. I followed everyone. She sighed and leaned against the kitchen counter. I didn't think you'd actually do it. I know. There was a long silence between us, filled only by the sound of Lucas kicking the ball against the living room wall and laughing at the rebound. I never meant to hurt you, she said at last. I met her eyes. You didn't need to mean it. You just needed to stop seeing me. That was the moment it landed for both of us, that the damage wasn't in one public insult or one pay cut. It had started long ago in all the quiet choices, the diminishing, the dismissals, the absence of kindness when power arrived. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, voice even. She nodded once and stepped past me into the living room. I didn't follow. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, I emailed Jared. All 4 clients reached out. Not because I asked. Because they saw what you saw. He replied 5 minutes later. Then we begin. And we did. Monday morning hit like a starting pistol. No time for nerves, no time for nostalgia. I sat at my new desk, sleek, minimalist, modern, with a fresh notepad, a full mug of black coffee, and a locked-in determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't easing into Kortniks. I was leading. Jared had made it clear the minute I signed. We're not hiring you to blend in. We're building a new lane for you. That lane began now. At 8:03 a.m., my inbox chimed. Subject, checking in. Marcus, just heard the news. If you're open to a conversation, I'd love to catch up. We've got some flexibility coming up in Q3, and I've always valued your insight. Sonia Dare, Teltrix Solutions. Sonia was old school, sharp as a blade, and twice as unforgiving if you crossed her. She never moved lightly. The fact that she was the first to reach out wasn't an accident. It was a signal. By 8:17 a.m., I had 2 more emails waiting, Marcus Doyle from Graywell and Fiona Lacey from Enduratech. None of them asked directly if I'd poached them. They were too savvy for that. Instead, the messages read like invitations. Where are you landing? We may need a new approach. Let me know where you are. Every word coded in plausible deniability, every sentence humming with interest. And I hadn't made a single call. That was the thing Karina never understood. Business relationships aren't built on discounts or gimmicks. They're built on trust. Trust that's earned in quiet ways. Meeting deadlines without being asked, staying late to walk a client through integration issues, remembering the name of a client's daughter when no one else did. Trust lives in the small details. And now, as the news of my departure rippled through the industry, trust was doing the work for me. I didn't rush to reply. I spent the morning reviewing Courtnix's client portfolios, looking for gaps, missed opportunities, areas where we could outperform Silvra. It wasn't hard to find them. Silvra had become bloated, too many middle managers, too many processes that smothered momentum. I knew because I helped build them. But Courtnix was lean, fast, and ready to move. At 11:20 a.m., Jared stepped into my office, a grin already spreading across his face. Let me guess, he said. They're calling. They're circling, I corrected, tapping my inbox. They'll call by Friday. They'll call today, he said, pulling up a chair. Sonia's on a panel with me next week. She asked if we could grab coffee in advance. I've known her for 8 years. She's not a coffee kind of woman. I nodded, but I wasn't surprised. This wasn't arrogance. It was the slow unfolding of inevitable consequences. Silvra thought they owned those accounts. What they owned was access. What I had was loyalty. And that couldn't be bought back. Jared slid a paper onto my desk. List of key accounts we want to target. Most of them are clients you touched at some point, even if indirectly. Take a look. You know them better than we do. I scanned the list. Teltrix, Graywell, Norkin, Xylene, and 3 others I'd helped onboard back in the lean days when Silvra still hosted brainstorming sessions on folding tables. I recognized the names. I remembered the wins. And I remembered how I was never the one invited to the podium when the deals closed. How aggressive are we being? I asked. You tell me, Jared said. We're not stealing. We're simply being open. If they come, we catch. No emails. No pitches. No contact first. Just let the magnet work. And it was already working. At 12:03 p.m., the first call came. My phone buzzed. Elaine Winters. The same Elaine who once told me, to my face, I don't switch vendors. I don't do drama. The woman who once asked Karina to remove me from a Zoom call because she thought executives should know when to exit quietly. I picked up. Elaine, I said. Marcus, she replied, her tone cool but curious. You landed somewhere yet? I have. Courtnix. Yes. There was a pause. Good. I've been waiting for a reason. A reason. That's what I had become, a reason to reevaluate, to reconsider, to realign. We talked for 6 minutes. She asked questions about Courtnix's roadmap, stability, ethics. I answered clearly, honestly, with no attempts to sell her. When we hung up, I didn't press. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. At 2:12 p.m., Marcus Doyle followed. By 4:47 p.m., I had 6 meetings on the calendar. All requested. None initiated by me. I leaned back in my chair, watching the soft glow of sunset stretch across the Courtnix skyline view, an office without tension, without judgment, without silent warfare tea. When Karina came to pick him up, she paused in the doorway. You're home early, she said. I work somewhere that values balance, I said, not looking up from the drawing Lucas had taped to the fridge. She didn't respond. As they left, Lucas turned back and whispered, Can we hang out again Wednesday? Count on it, I said. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, the house quiet, the evening light soft and forgiving. I'd spent years thinking that victory was about holding the high ground, staying loyal, waiting to be recognized. But real victory? It was having people remember who you were when you're no longer in the room. And they were remembering now. It was a Thursday night. Late. Lucas had just gone to bed, and I'd finished replying to a last batch of emails, quiet ripples from the growing wave of client shifts. The numbers were speaking for themselves. Kortnick's weekly growth metrics were starting to mirror Silver's losses. Even Jared, usually calm and smooth, was starting to wear a look I hadn't seen before. Hunger. The kind of hunger that came from watching years of waiting finally start to bear fruit. I just set my phone down when it rang, an unknown number, local area code. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Marcus Ellison," I said. There was a pause. Then, "Marcus. It's Harland Royce, the CEO of Silver Systems." I stood without realizing it, one hand bracing the edge of the kitchen island. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Even when I was still with the company, Harland was one of those appear-once-a-quarter leaders, only visible when there were cameras or crises. Apparently, this was both. "Evening, Harland," I said evenly. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "I'd like to speak man-to-man," he began, his tone diplomatic, controlled. I could practically hear the legal department sitting behind him, nodding silently. "All right," I replied, walking to the living room window. "I'm listening. This situation with your departure, it's escalating more than we anticipated." "I didn't escalate anything. That's not what I meant." He cleared his throat. "You've built strong relationships over the years, and we recognize that. But the client shifts we've seen recently are the result of trust," I cut in. "Trust you let your head of people publicly destroy." He was quiet for a beat. Then he continued, measured. "We'd like to offer you a revised package. New title, Senior Partner, Equity, Full Reinstatement. We can undo what was done." I almost laughed. Not out of disrespect, but disbelief. The man who once told a boardroom that I was foundational, but not irreplaceable, now wanted to reverse course because he finally understood that foundation didn't mean invisible. It meant essential. "You're too late," I said. "Think about your family," he said softly. I looked down the hallway, where Lucas's nightlight glowed under the doorframe. "I have," I replied. I thought about my son asking why his mother yelled at me in front of the entire staff. I thought about the mornings he saw me leave before sunrise and come back after dark. I thought about the way he stopped drawing me in family portraits because I was always at work. "Marcus, I gave everything to Silvera," I continued. "I built departments from scratch, held clients when your systems were failing, brought in the kinds of contracts that paid for Karina's entire HR restructuring. And when I needed dignity, just dignity, you gave me silence. Until the numbers dropped. We didn't realize. You didn't care," I said, sharper now. "And now that the market's reacting, I'm suddenly valuable again? That's not how it works." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, finally, "Is there anything we can say to make this right?" I looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the pavement. I thought about the peace I'd felt walking into Kortnick's each day. The respect in Jared's voice when he asked for my opinion. The way my calendar finally had room for my son. I thought about the meetings I'd had that week alone, 7 clients already transitioning, for more reviewing proposals. The new team I was mentoring, people who looked at me not as a relic, but as a leader. And I thought about Karina, who hadn't reached out once. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to argue. "You can't make it right," I said, "because you let it go too far. And the worst part is, you probably still don't understand what you let her do to me. You didn't lose a name. You lost the one person who never asked for the spotlight, but held your brand together when everything else cracked." Another pause. But this one had weight. "I see," he finally said. "No, Harland. That's the problem. You never did." I ended the call. I stood there in the quiet, the silence thick around me, the finality of that conversation ringing louder than anything he'd said. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That part had burned away weeks ago. What I felt now was something cleaner. Stronger. Closure. That night, I walked into Lucas's room. He was half awake, curled in a messy tangle of sheets, his mouth slightly open. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a hand through his hair. "You won't have to ask me to be home anymore," I whispered. "I'm already here." The next morning, I opened my email and typed one final message to Jared. Subject, full commitment. Harland called. He offered everything. I turned it down. "Let's move forward." Jared replied 2 minutes later. "Then it's time to grow this thing. Full speed." And we did. 2 months had passed. The skyline outside my Kortnick's office shimmered with late morning sun, the glass panels of neighboring towers casting reflections across my desk. I just wrapped up a call with Graywell International, our third successful transition in 6 weeks, when my assistant knocked gently on the glass. Marcus, there's a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd want to see her. I didn't need to ask who. I stood, adjusted the cuff of my shirt, and walked out to the reception area. And there she was, Karina. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The steel-hard edges she once wore like armor were duller, and the confident tilt of her chin was now tinged with restraint. Her blazer was crisp, her heels sharp as ever, but there was a quiet unease in the way she held her purse close to her body, like it could shield her from what she'd come to face. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Marcus, she said, her voice measured. Karina, I was hoping we could talk. Privately. I nodded once, turned, and led her to my office. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing in a silence thick with everything we hadn't said in months. She glanced around the space, sleek, warm-toned, tastefully modern. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in natural light, and behind my desk, the Cortinix logo gleamed against matte black. This is nice, she said, forcing something close to polite. Very you. I sat behind my desk and motioned for her to take the seat across from me. She did, folding her hands over her knee. Her eyes darted to the nameplate on my desk. Marcus Ellison, Vice President, Global Client Partnerships. Her jaw tightened. You've turned half the market against me, she said, skipping the preamble. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself when you made a spectacle out of your husband in front of junior staff. I just left. I was doing my job. You were executing a performance, I said. You didn't just cut my salary. You tried to humiliate me. And you made sure they all saw it. She shifted in her chair. I didn't think it would unravel this way. That's the thing, Karina. You didn't think at all. You thought I'd take it like I always did. Quietly. With grace. You forgot I built Silver's backbone while you chased visibility. I never took credit for your work. No, but you never shared it either. She looked down at her hands for a moment, gathering herself. You were always consistent. Predictable. And you needed that. Until you didn't. Silence again. She looked up at me, the edge in her expression softening just slightly. I came because I wanted to understand, she said. Why you let it all go. Us. The company. Everything. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk. I didn't let anything go, Karina. I just stopped holding things that were already breaking me. She blinked. I fought for us, I continued. For the company. For every meeting, every deal, every late night that I covered while you climbed. And you, somewhere along the way, stopped seeing me as a partner. I became convenient. Background. Replaceable. I was under pressure, she said quietly. We all were. But pressure reveals character. And yours came out cold. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Do you love what you're doing now? I didn't hesitate. I do. She nodded once, like she already knew the answer. And Lucas? She asked. He sees me now, I said. I'm home. I coach his team. He puts me in his drawings again. That hit her harder than anything else I'd said. You know what he asked me last week? I added. Why didn't Mom ever clap when you came on stage at Career Day? I didn't even know he noticed. But he did. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No defense. No explanation. You're right, she said finally. I stopped seeing you. Somewhere between my ambition and my control, I just assumed you'd never leave. And I told myself that made me strong. It made you blind. She nodded. Slowly. Then stood. Well, you've made your point. I stood too. I didn't ask you here. I know, she said. But I had to see it for myself. What you became when you stopped standing in my shadow. We locked eyes for a long moment. There was no hatred there. No venom. Just a mutual understanding that something had ended, and it wasn't temporary. You were always meant for more, she whispered. I stepped back. You just didn't want me to have it. She took a shaky breath and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, she turned once more. Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Karina. She left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat back down, the quiet settling around me. But this silence didn't ache. It didn't feel like a void. It felt earned. Peaceful. Right. And outside, the city continued to move, deals waiting, clients calling, my future wide open. She had walked into my office thinking I might look back. But I was already facing forward. A full year had passed. 12 months since I walked out of Silver Systems with a box in my hands and my reputation intact. 12 months since Karina's voice echoed through that glass-walled room. delivering a threat wrapped in corporate language. And now, sitting at the head of a wide walnut conference table in Kortnick's downtown headquarters, I realized something. I hadn't once looked back. Not out of stubbornness. Out of peace. Final numbers from Q2, Jared said, sliding a folder across to me. We're up 27% over last year. That includes the Teltrix account, Graywell, Xylene, and now Enduratech. I opened the folder and let the numbers speak for themselves. Every name in that report had once been a silver client. Every deal was one I had either originated, nurtured, or saved when others had fumbled it. But I hadn't poached a single one. I hadn't needed to. Trust is gravity. It pulls the right people toward you once the mask slips from those they thought they could rely on. Maria now ran our partner analytics division. Devin led our compliance team. Both had followed me from Silvera. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. They saw what I had endured. They saw what Karina did. And when the opportunity came to build something different, something ethical and quietly powerful, they didn't hesitate. Kortnick's hadn't just gained clients. It had gained culture. I closed the folder. Let's keep going. No press. No victory laps. Just results. Jared grinned. You ever gonna let yourself enjoy this? I'm enjoying it, I said. I just don't need to scream about it. Later that evening, I left the office while the sun still hung low over the skyline. My car was already idling in the underground lot, another silent courtesy from the assistant I once doubted I needed. I learned something in the last year. Freedom doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes, it comes from routine. From walking into a place every day where you're respected, not questioned. From leaving early enough to make it home in time for dinner. Lucas was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in. Soccer cleats on the table, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand, and a grin smeared with peanut butter. Coach Ellison, he declared, we've got practice tomorrow. Wouldn't miss it, I said, ruffling his hair. He was taller now, more confident. And for the first time since the divorce papers had been quietly filed and finalized 6 months ago, I saw how much calmer he was. Less anxious. Less confused. The absence of tension in the house had made room for growth, and both of us. He ran off to get his ball from the yard, and I stepped out to the porch, phone in hand. An alert popped up on my screen. Silver stock down 17% following quarterly loss. HR department undergoing restructuring. There was a picture embedded in the article, Harlan looking stiff behind a podium, his tie slightly crooked, and beside him, an empty chair. Karina had stepped down a few months earlier, citing personal growth goals. Translation: she'd been pushed. The industry wasn't stupid. When 4 major clients walked within 90 days of my resignation, it raised eyebrows. When 2 of her own staff followed me to Kortnick's, it raised questions. When the media caught wind of her HR decisions and the mysterious reclassification of her own husband, it became a liability. And me? I didn't comment. I didn't retaliate. I didn't even post a cryptic LinkedIn update. I just kept building. Because real payback isn't noisy. It's dignified. It's being so focused on what you're creating that you don't have time to burn down what you left behind. Dinner that night was simple: grilled chicken, roasted carrots, and a salad Lucas mostly picked around. We laughed about a joke his coach told, and when he went to bed, I sat by the window with a glass of wine and the soft buzz of contentment settling around me. I thought about everything Karina had once meant to me, everything we tried to build together, and how she had weaponized the very thing we created. But I also thought about what came after. The morning sun through Kortnick's floor-to-ceiling windows. The way Maria teared up during our team retreat when she said, "It's nice to work somewhere that feels human again." The late-night pitch meetings with Jared, where we built strategies off instinct, not ego. The emails from clients who said, "We trust you to lead this." Karina's voice was gone from my life now. Her silence was louder than any apology would have been. But her absence didn't sting. It was a gift. Because the truth is, I didn't need her to fall for me to rise. I didn't need Silvera to burn to prove I'd been fire all along. I just needed to walk away and remember who I was before I started shrinking to fit her spotlight. I took a final sip of wine and looked out at the stars peeking through the dark. Then I picked up my phone and opened a blank note. Reminder to self. Leadership isn't loud. Dignity doesn't beg. Loyalty, when abused, becomes clarity. Trust will follow the person, not the brand. The best payback is peace. I closed the phone, set it on the table, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would come, and I was ready. I showed up to my wife's lavish company branch opening party. only to see everyone laughing and staring at me. The 1-minute man in bed is here. Then my wife's office lover called security and said, "Get this impotent man out of here." So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 70% company share, $97 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 56 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. I stepped into the gleaming foyer of the branch opening in my perfectly pressed navy suit, heart pounding like a drumbeat against my ribs. In my hand, I held a small, neatly wrapped box, just a token of pride and support for Mira. I'd helped build this company from the ground up, pouring my evenings into balance sheets and lending her the quiet confidence she wore on magazine covers. I hadn't been on the guest list, but I'd arranged surprise proposals, secured investors, even negotiated the lease for this very space. Tonight was meant to be her moment. I was the surprise. The music in the hall sputtered and died the moment I crossed the threshold, as though every chord had been rewound. A hush swept over the crowd, and then laughter exploded like shattering glass. My skin prickled. Someone, one of her new team members, I guessed, yelled, "Look who's here, the 1-minute man in bed." A roar of cruel delight followed that jibe. My gift slipped in my hand. I caught it before the paper tore, but the tremor in my fingers spread to my elbows and knees. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. Mira stood at the head of the ballroom, in front of a backdrop emblazoned with her name and the company logo. Her gaze flicked to me for an instant. Hurt, shock, something unreadable, then cut away as if I didn't exist. My breath hitched. A flicker of desperation urged me to speak, to salvage the moment, to demand respect. But I didn't. I watched her shoulders tighten, the way she held the microphone as though it were a shield. Dorian, her office lover, stepped forward from the side, lips curving into a triumphant smirk. "Security," he said, loud enough that everyone could hear. "Get this impotent man out of here." The reverberation of his command kicked me in the gut. I felt the weight of every person's stare, 100 pairs of eyes like needles pinning me to the polished marble floor. In that instant, I understood how completely I had vanished from her world. I was no partner, no equal, just a stain on her perfect evening. 2 burly security guards materialized at my elbows. Their hands were firm on my arms, fingers wrapped in gloves that were colder than steel. They steered me forward, away from the crowd's murmurs and chuckles, past rows of white-draped tables and crystal chandeliers. Every step took me farther from the man I had been. The quiet keeper of spreadsheets and midnight coffee runs, the one who built office systems while she cultivated her personal brand. In a twisted irony, I realized the only role I was allowed now was the invisible outsider. I didn't resist. What could I say? "I'm hurt. I love you." The words felt as hollow as the applause that greeted her speech once I'd been led away. I gave one backward glance at the throng of supporters and investors gathered under soft floodlights, their expressions ranging from awkward embarrassment to gleeful satisfaction. Myra's face shone in the spotlight. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I wondered if she'd rehearsed this public disavowal with Dorian, plotted the timing so the announcement and the insult would land together like a hammer. Outside, the cool night air slapped me awake. On the steps of the venue, I paused, still in my suit and tie, the gift clutched as tightly as a lifeline. Lights from the street lamps splintered across the pavement, but they offered no clarity, only harsh illumination of the boxed present, now a symbol of my failure. I breathed in the cold, tasting resentment and disbelief. My jaw ached from holding back the retort I never voiced. Shame wove through me like a bitter perfume. I shuffled down the sidewalk, my shoes clicking in rhythm with my heartbeat. The city felt indifferent to my humiliation. Cars hurried by. Couples strolled arm in arm. Neon signs flickered announcements of convenience stores and cafes. Each step peeled away another layer of my composure until all that remained was a hollow echo of disappointment. I hadn't even argued when they ushered me out. Pride and grief warred for dominance inside me, but neither could break free. By the time I reached the curb, I realized I was still holding the gift. The wrapping paper was intact, but the ribbon lay twisted and uneven. I sank onto a low stone wall, sliding down until I was perched at its edge. The package rested in my lap, a small bright promise that felt meaningless now. I stared at the little bow, at the neat edges of the box, wondering if I should toss it into the gutter or hold on to it like proof that I still cared. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, but not with Myra's name on the screen. Just a string of business notifications, reminders that my own company files awaited my attention. A text from an investor popped up. "Congrats on tonight's launch, Mira," followed by a smiling emoji. I let the phone slip from my hand, the screen lighting up the asphalt before the device skidded to a stop. I didn't chase it. I sat there, silent and still, feeling the weight of that cruel phrase echoing in my mind. 1 minute man. The insult stung, but it wasn't only about sex. It was about worth, about power, but most devastatingly, about love. They had stripped me of my dignity in front of everyone who mattered to her. I closed my eyes and felt the ache of rejection slide between my ribs, nestling there like a shard of glass. I wasn't angry yet. I was too stunned. I lifted the gift and held it against my chest, as if it might protect me from the truth, that in her brand new world, I no longer had a place. I sank onto the cold bench outside the gleaming branch opening, the neatly wrapped gift still resting in my lap like a fragile promise I couldn't deliver. Streetlights spilled pools of amber across the pavement, casting long, wavering shadows that flickered like ghosts of every memory I'd built with Mira. My shoulders slumped, and the weight of that small box felt heavier than any burden I'd carried for the company. I traced the edge of the ribbon with a fingertip, imagining how she might have unfurled it, cracked open the paper, and found the delicate bracelet inside, a simple silver link engraved with her initials. Instead, I sat alone, the night air crisp against my skin, and listened to the silence of a phone that ought to be buzzing with her apology. My phone did buzz, but not with her name. The screen lit up with a string of automated notifications, stock reports, reminders of upcoming board meetings, half-read emails from investors. None bore the warmth of her voice or the familiarity of a heartfelt text. I stared at the blank space where her reply should have been and felt the ache of betrayal twist in my gut. The laughter from inside the event still echoed in my ears. Harsh, triumphant, dismissive. Impotent man, they'd called me. It wasn't merely a taunt about my body. It was a declaration that I was useless, invisible, unworthy of the life we'd shared. The knowledge cut deeper than any insult I could have hurled at them. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to the early days, when Mira and I were a team united by vision and trust. I remembered late nights scattered across spreadsheets, her soft laughter drifting through the home office as she drafted marketing copy. I'd proofread while she sketched logos, offering quiet encouragement when she doubted her own brilliance. I financed our first lease, secured the series of seed investments, negotiated vendor discounts for her prototypes. Every crucial corner of that company bore my fingerprints, though the public face belonged to her. In her speeches, she'd extolled the virtues of innovation, the spirit of entrepreneurship, never once acknowledging the silent architect behind the scenes, me. It wasn't resentment I felt in that moment on the bench. It was grief. The grief of realizing that every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night spent securing lines of credit, had been taken for granted. I pictured the unopened gift tucked away somewhere inside that building, lying neglected on a satin cloth or a mahogany desk, as she basked in applause atop her platform. Anger flickered at the edges of my thoughts, but it was cold and distant. What warmed my chest was determination. I couldn't force her to open that box, but I could open a new chapter for myself, one in which my worth wasn't tied to someone else's validation. I exhaled, and a plume of breath drifted into the night. I pressed the gift against my heart, closed my fingers around it, and felt its reassuring solidity. The ribbon slipped through my grasp as I untied it, the paper glinting silver under the lamplight. My first instinct was to peek inside, to reclaim the moment I'd lost. But I paused, looking up at the building's darkened facade through the glass walls, no longer a place I could call home. The gift was hers to open, not mine to force. With a decisive motion, I gathered the wrapping and tossed it to the ground. The rustle of paper felt like a liberation. Then I held the box aloft for a moment, as if offering it back to the night, and slipped it into my coat pocket. The promise it embodied was mine to reframe, no longer a testament to pride in her accomplishments, but a reminder of everything I was capable of achieving on my own. My phone buzzed again, another email, another alert. I swiped through the messages with deliberate calm, pausing only to delete the ones bearing Myra's name in sender fields. In their place, I started typing a new note to myself. Remember your value. You built this. The words appeared on the screen like a mantra, steady and unyielding. I stood and brushed off my suit jacket, the crisp navy fabric no longer feeling like armor against shame, but rather a reminder of who I'd been and who I could become. The city's hum softened at my back as I took a step away from the bench. My path lay forward, not back to that building or the mocking eyes within. I felt the steady thrum of purpose pulse through my veins, stronger than any insult or humiliation. As I walked, the unopened gift nestled against my chest beneath my jacket. I realized that the true power lay not in exposing someone else's wrongdoing, but in reclaiming my dignity on my own terms. No longer the silent supporter, I would become the architect of my own destiny. Mira could keep her empty stage. I was heading toward a future where respect wasn't borrowed. It was earned through action and integrity. By the time I turned the corner onto the quieter street, the gift no longer weighed me down. Instead, it reminded me that kindness endured beyond rejection, that generosity could flow in every direction. I pocketed my phone, squared my shoulders against the night breeze, and began to carve out a new narrative, one where I would claim the applause that had always been rightfully mine. I returned home that evening with the gift still tucked in my coat pocket, a silent testament to the pride I once felt. The streetlights flickered as I climbed the steps to our front door, and each creak in the old wood underfoot echoed the fractures in my life. Inside, the apartment was dark and empty, save for the cold glow of the city skyline through the curtains. I set the gift on the coffee table, then moved to my desk where a neat, unassuming folder lay waiting, the one I had kept meticulously updated over the years. I flipped on the lamp and opened the folder to the first page, a printed invoice from our earliest days, dated nearly a decade ago. The currency conversion rate was scribbled in the margin, and my handwriting marked the cost of licensing fees I'd negotiated on Myra's behalf. I traced the faint pencil strokes, recalling how I had offered my savings to fund her vision when no bank would lend us a dime. My chest tightened at the memory of handing over that down payment, barely daring to hope it would become more than a gamble. I rifled through the stack. Wire transfer confirmations, digital prints of bank statements showing six-figure amounts wired from my personal account into the company's operating fund, emails with heads of wealth management praising my credit line. 70% of the capital had come from me. I remembered the late nights huddled in coffee shops, counting the dwindling funds, calculating whether we could afford another round of prototype tests. Mira had been our public face, but I was the scaffolding holding her performance aloft. Each document I pulled from the folder carried its own story. There were copies of the convertible notes I co-signed, the promissory notes I drafted to secure short-term loans, spreadsheets I built to track burn rates. I even found the insurance policies I arranged to cover product liability, dedicating hours to negotiating premiums so that our fragile startup wouldn't crumble under legal scrutiny. I flipped through every page, feeling the weight of my contributions accumulate like layers of sediment. Each sheet a sedimentation of my sweat and faith. Then I reached the tax filings. My name appeared on every K-1 distribution statement, my social security number entwined with the company's EIN. I recalled the meeting when I had insisted we file as an S-corporation to maximize her personal brand's tax efficiencies, the arguments we had about dollars saved versus dollars earned. Mira had waved away my concerns, trusting me to handle the minutiae while she dazzled investors on stage. Now it struck me how invisible I had been in her success story. I closed the folder gently and opened my laptop. A blank spreadsheet waited for me, columns labeled date, description, amount, account, notes. I began entering figures. The $250,000 seed round I funded, the $1. 2 million Series A wire I initiated after negotiating a valuation I deemed fair, the $500,000 bridge loan I underwrote when investors balked. As I typed each line, the numbers formed a ledger of my devotion, a ledger that should have warranted respect, but instead became ammunition for public humiliation. A new folder lay beside me, its flap fresh and crisp. On it, I printed a bold label. Final. The word felt good on my tongue, heavy with promise. I reassured myself that this folder would mark a turning point. I poured another cup of coffee and spread the chart printouts on the desk, arranging them into stacks by year. There was a certain poetry in seeing the trajectory of commitment drawn in bar graphs and pie charts, a visual testament to every sleepless night and every penny risked. I paused and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered like a constellation of opportunities yet undiscovered. The receipts and invoices were more than proof of loan agreements. They were proof of my capacity to create, to endure, to build. They reminded me that my worth was not measured by applause, but by the integrity of my actions. My throat tightened with gratitude for the experience, even as it trembled with the sting of betrayal. With deliberate care, I placed each document into the new folder, my fingers brushing embossed labels and printed ink. When the last sheet slid inside, I snapped it shut. It was compact, but it contained the sum of my partnership in the company that had turned its back on me. I laid the final folder atop the original one, as though stacking the old chapters beneath this new resolution. I leaned back in my chair, clutching the folder to my chest. A slow, sure sense of calm washed over me. I realized that the humiliation I had endured could fuel my next chapter. The receipts were a weapon not of vengeance, but of self-assertion, a reminder that I possessed the skills, the capital, and the tenacity to begin again. The gift on the coffee table caught my eye. I rose and retrieved it, lifting the ribbon to inspect the box. For a moment, I considered tossing it aside in anger, but instead I placed it gently into the final folder, as though sealing my past kindness within the ledger of my future resolve. I shut off the lamp and closed my laptop. In the hush of the apartment, I heard my own heartbeat, steady and resolute. The folder lay on the desk like the blueprint of my next move, the unspoken contract with myself to reclaim agency and dignity. I stepped away from the desk, pausing for a final glance. Tomorrow, I would begin executing the strategy outlined within these pages. Tonight, however, I simply breathed the quiet thrill of purpose, knowing that my silence would speak louder than any shout. That night, I sat alone at my home office desk, the glow of multiple screens illuminating my face as if spotlighting a stage I'd reclaimed. Silence reigned in the apartment, broken only by the rhythmic whir of the computer's fans and the soft click of my keyboard. I opened the secure credentials file I'd maintained since the company's inception, logins for finance portals, vendor management platforms, travel booking sites, even the private blockchain node where our equity controls resided. My heart thrummed, each beat echoing a mix of trepidation and steely resolve. This was my moment to act, to translate my quiet fury into decisive steps that would dismantle the empire built on my sacrifice. First, I navigated to the hotel accounts. The executive retreat in Aspen, slated for next month, was already fully booked. Luxury chalets, ski-in access, conference rooms overlooking snow-dusted pines. I clicked through the itinerary details and selected Cancel Reservation. A cascade of automated prompts confirmed my authority. The system displayed a polite apology notice, promising full refunds. I let out a small breath, tasting the bitterness of reprisal mingled with the sweetness of justice. No more would they toast champagne in my name while mocking the man who funded every reservation. Next, I turned to the vendor contracts. I accessed the procurement portal and located the executive lounge renovation at their flagship headquarters. Marble flooring, custom cabinetry, a sculptural reception desk. I marked the contract, terminate, then sent the official notice. At the same moment, I canceled 3 catering agreements for the gala dinners, stopped payment authorizations for the branded swag shipments, and retracted our commitment to a 5-year audiovisual service contract. Each cancellation triggered an email, terse notifications that didn't know the full story. I pictured the panic that would ripple through her team when they realized their polished events and white-glove services had been yanked away, leaving bare walls and empty plate carts. With the operational cutbacks in motion, I shifted to shareholder rights. I opened the equity management dashboard, where the cap table glowed with the distribution of shares. Mira owned a significant portion, Dorian a smaller slice, and I held the largest block. I activated the emergency freeze function, a feature I'd insisted upon during the company's founding precisely for moments like this. Instantly, the $97 million funding pool under my control locked down. All pending fund disbursements halted. Venture capital deposits remained in limbo. A confirmation dialog appeared. Funding pool successfully frozen. I stared at those words, feeling the thrill of power surge through me as though I'd pulled the lever on a giant vault door. I leaned back in my chair, fingertips brushing the cool metal of my desk lamp. My reflection in the dark window looked different. Eyes more focused, shoulders less weighed by doubt. I considered the dawn's board meeting, when news of the freeze would spread like wildfire. I imagined Myra's face when she realized the capital she'd trumpeted in press releases was now locked away, inaccessible. I imagined Dorian's bravado fading when he saw his own compensation and expense accounts suspended. I had been invisible for too long. Now I would be undeniable. Still in the glow of my victory, I drafted a concise notification to the board, signed with my formal digital signature. Effective immediately, pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Shareholders Agreement, I am exercising my right to freeze the designated funding pool. Further details available upon request. I didn't gloat, didn't elaborate. The words were enough. Any board member worth their salt would know what came next. Emergency calls, crisis meetings, reputations on the line. I saved the email as a draft. I would send it at sunrise, timing it to coincide with the open of business in New York. I shut down the travel and procurement tabs and reopened the company's main financial portal. I reviewed the cash flow statements. Lines of credit formerly drawn by Myra's legal name, balances earmarked for marketing campaigns, payment schedules for influencer partnerships, all now pending authorization from a cold, unyielding freeze. I printed out a summary sheet for my lawyer, planning to deliver it first thing in the morning. My lawyer had been waiting in the wings, ready to advise should I choose to enforce my rights. Now, thanks to the digital breadcrumbs I'd left, the path was clear. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a long exhale, leaning back so far the chair creaked in protest. The apartment felt warmer, more mine. The air carried the faint scent of my coffee, now cold. I stood, stretched my arms overhead, and felt the tension drain from my spine. In that moment, I recognized the magnitude of what I'd done, seized control, asserted my stake, and sent a message that silence, yes, my trademark silence, could be louder than any public outcry. At the edge of my desk lay the final folder from the night before, containing every invoice and wire transfer I'd ever made. I reached out, placed a hand on its textured cover, and tapped it gently. It felt solid, like the foundation beneath my feet. I would move forward with this document as both armor and blueprint. Before leaving the office, I retrieved my phone and composed a brief text to Marla, Myra's assistant. Morning. You and I need to talk. I didn't elaborate. She would sense the gravity. Then I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, heading toward the bedroom. As I crawled under the sheets, fatigue washed over me in heavy waves. Yet beneath the exhaustion, excitement shimmered. I had disrupted their world at the very core. I had reclaimed agency over my own life and finances. Tomorrow would bring chaos for them, but for me, a calm dawn of autonomy. I drifted to sleep with the hum of the city outside my window, a lullaby to accompany a man unbowed, unbroken, and ready to forge his own destiny. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, painting soft gold stripes across the rumpled sheets. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the distant hum of traffic below and the faint click of a hallway door. My phone lay silent on the nightstand, but I already knew what awaited me. An avalanche of missed calls and messages that would shatter the precarious calm I'd carved for myself. I steeled my resolve and sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. My suit jacket hung on a chair beside the desk. I shrugged into it, the fabric snug against my shoulders, and patted the inside pocket where I kept a copy of the board notification. From here onward, everything would happen on my terms. I reached for the phone. 56 missed calls glared at me, a retrospective on the chaos I'd unleashed. Mira, Dorian, Marla, my lawyer, and even a handful of numbers I didn't recognize. Name after name insisted on explanations. A string of voicemails ran longer than I cared to listen, pleading apologies, stammering questions, frantic promises. I let the screen settle on the voicemail list and tapped delete. Each press felt like another step away from the man they thought they could break. I returned to the message list and began deleting texts, emails from investors demanding conference calls, push notifications from project management platforms spamming urgent alerts, social media pings from colleagues tagged in crisis threads. I didn't intend to hide. I intended to choose my moment to respond. For now, silence remained my strongest statement. I rose and made my way to the minibar. The plush carpet whispered under my feet as I poured a glass of water and took a deep swallow. With my reflection in the mirror, dark circles under my eyes, expression calm but hawk-like, I felt something shift inside me. The faceless majority of my life had been reduced to panic-stricken pleas. Now the world would bend to meet the consequences of its own arrogance. Just then, my lawyer's name popped up. I answered. "They've seen it," I said, voice steady. "Funds are frozen. Aspen retreat canceled. Lounge renovations terminated. Who's next?" He inhaled sharply. "Board's convening an emergency meeting at 9. Mira is calling a special session of investors this afternoon. They're scrambling to find liquidity." I let the silence stretch. Good. Minutes later, another call came through Marla. She'd never sounded so tentative. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice cracking. "Everyone's in meltdown." "I'm fine," I replied. "Meet me in the lobby in 30. She hesitated. "What do you want?" "Answers." I hung up without another word. I showered quickly, the hot water washing away the residue of sleepless nights more effectively than any shampoo. In the mirror, I studied my face, marked by determination. By the time I stepped into the lobby, I wore not just a suit, but the armor of conviction. Marla waited by the front desk, her eyes red-rimmed, makeup smudged in places. She straightened when she saw me, lips parting in a silent question. I offered a small nod and steered her toward the seating area. Plush armchairs faced a low table strewn with business magazines. I sat. She perched on the edge of the chair opposite me, hands twisting in her lap. "Marla," I began, voice low but clear. "Why didn't you stand up for me? When Dorian ordered security to haul me out, you let it happen." Her gaze dropped. "I'm sorry. I felt powerless. Dorian threatened to fire me if I did anything. Mira made it worse by not saying a word. You did nothing." I leaned forward. "You saw the look on her face. You saw the gutting of everything I built. You stayed silent." Her eyes met mine, brimming. "I know. I was scared. But I'm scared now, too. The board's in an uproar. Investors are threatening to pull out. Dorian doesn't know numbers. He never has. And Mira, she's lost control." A slow satisfaction spread across me. "Good." She blinked. "What are you going to do?" I closed my eyes, picturing the spreadsheet summaries in the final folder, the invoices, the wire transfers, proof in my own hand that I had been the company's backbone. "We're going to create a bridge loan," I said. "I'll authorize a $20 million interim facility to keep them afloat until they find new financing. But there are conditions." Marla's shoulders tensed. "What conditions?" I opened my eyes. "First, Mira steps down as CEO. She can take an advisory role, but no operational control. Second, Dorian's contract is terminated. He'll leave with a negotiated severance. Third, the board composition changes. I get 2 seats, including the chair of the audit committee. And fourth, we bring in an independent financial controller, someone with no ties to the old regime." She gasped. That's drastic." "It's necessary," I said. "They humiliated me publicly. They erased my contributions. They can't be trusted with my money unless they agree to these terms." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'll tell them." I rose and offered a hand. "Thank you, Marla. You're doing the right thing." She nodded, accepting my hand. "I always believed in you," she whispered. "I just never knew how to show it." In that moment, compassion softened the sharp edges of my resolve. I squeezed her hand. "Then show it now." She stood and walked back toward the front desk, shoulders squared. I watched her go, then turned to the windows overlooking the street. The city moved on, unaware of the shifting power dynamics inside this hotel. Soon, every executive in that building would be reading my terms, scrambling to preserve their own positions. I returned to my room and poured another glass of water. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my lawyer. Draft agreement attached. Sign and return to counsel. I scanned the document. Lines of text laid out my conditions, my demands, my assertions of rightful authority. I signed in the signature block with a flourish. Then I took a deep breath, feeling the promise of renewal in every cell. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, banishing the shadows. I had initiated the fallout. Now I would oversee the settlement. The balance of power had shifted, and no one would mistake my silence for surrender again. I finished my water, pocketed the phone and the signed agreement, and stepped toward the door. Today, they would negotiate with the man they tried to humiliate. Today, I reclaimed not only my money, but my dignity and my future. And as I opened the door and walked into the hall, I carried with me the quiet certainty that I would never again be invisible in a world I helped create. The knock at the door came just after dinner, sharp against the hush of the hotel corridor. I'd been reviewing the latest draft of the bridge loan agreement, ensuring every clause protected my interests, when I heard it, 3 deliberate raps that echoed through the quiet hallway. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected anyone but Marla or my lawyer to seek me out so soon. When I opened the door, the corridor's golden light framed Myra's silhouette. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, strands escaping like tendrils around a storm cloud. She wore no makeup, and the puffiness around her eyes spoke of tears shed long before this moment. She began, her voice trembling, unsure, forfeiting the composed eloquence she once wielded on stage. I stepped aside and gestured toward the room, though my posture remained rigid. She crossed the threshold as though it were a tightrope, each step measured, uncertain. She paused in the center, gaze flitting around the minimalist decor as though expecting surprises or traps. I closed the door behind her. The foyer light cast her in soft relief, illuminating both her vulnerability and my resolve. I watched her swallow, her Adam's apple bobbing. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said finally, voice small. The accusation and the apology tangled together, raw and half-formed. I said nothing, instead closing the distance between us in 3 strides and dropping my briefcase onto the sofa. It landed with a thud that underscored the gravity of our new reality. She took a step back, eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stop it." The words felt thin, like an umbrella in a hurricane. I folded my arms, mouth a hard line. "You didn't try," I said. "You let them treat me like a stranger in my own marriage." Her lips trembled. She raised a hand as if to touch my arm, then paused. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I felt helpless. Dorian, he had all the pull. He made everything glamorous and exciting. When he told security to throw you out, I couldn't move." I closed my eyes, recalling the flush of embarrassment at the party, the cold grip of the guards, the hush that followed. My chest ached with the old wound. "Shame is only powerful if you let it stay inside you," I said. "You hid your shame behind my silence." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was dependent on you," she confessed. "I built my brand on your labor. I used your money, your expertise, your name. And then I was terrified of losing it all if I spoke up." Silence stretched between us, taut as a drawn bow. I studied her, every quiver of her lip, every flicker in her eyes, and realized I'd never seen her so exposed. The public persona had crumbled, revealing the woman beneath, flawed, regretful, desperate for redemption. Yet even in her vulnerability, I found no comfort. "I erased you," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. "I erased the man who held up my world." I exhaled, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. "You erased me in front of everyone I cared about," I replied. "That cuts deeper than any company account freeze." Her gaze dropped to the carpet. She seemed to shrink within the space, as though she wished to disappear. Then she lifted her head, resolve kindling in her eyes. "I want to fix this," she said, voice steadier. "I'll sign your agreement. I'll step down. I'll do whatever it takes." My mind replayed the clauses I'd drafted, repayment schedules, board seats, severance for Dorian, her resignation. Everything I'd demanded to protect my money and my dignity. I considered telling her there was more, an apology that went beyond legal documents, an admission that trust would take time to rebuild. But I didn't. Instead, I let her words hang in the air like an offering. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "But this isn't about just signing papers." I folded my arms again, though the rigidity in my chest softened slightly. "It's about acknowledging what happened. In here, I placed a hand over my heart, then let it rest by my side. You need to understand the consequences of your choices, not just the financial fallout. Tears welled again. She took a hesitant step forward. I do understand, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I lost you. I lost everything that mattered. And her voice broke, but she pressed on. I will live with that. I watched her inhale, as though drawing courage from the silent room. In that moment, I recognized the hardest part. Mercy. Justice had been served by freezing funds and restructuring the board. But mercy would come from acknowledging the truth between us and deciding whether to build something new or leave the ruins behind. I sighed, the sound soft and weighted. I'll send over the revised agreement tomorrow, I said. It will include a clause about a public statement, something to acknowledge the truth of what happened, so the world can see more than just the headlines. She nodded, determination tempered with humility. I'll do it, she promised. We stood in silence again, two figures in a quiet room, separated by trust broken and perhaps beginning to mend. I realized then that this was more than a negotiation of dollars and board seats. It was the reckoning of a relationship built on unspoken debts and silent sacrifices. She pressed her fingers together, tears glimmering in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said again, softer this time. For everything. I took a measured breath, the weight of my anger and the sting of her apology settling into a fragile drift. I know, I replied. Now let's see what comes next. She offered me a small, tentative smile, a gesture that felt like the first flicker of dawn after a long night. I returned it with a nod. Then, without another word, I turned toward the desk where the folder labeled Final lay waiting, and she followed me. Together, we stood at the precipice of an uncertain future, one we would have to chart without the safety net of silence. When I walked back into the company offices the next morning, the familiar hum of printers and ringing phones had been replaced by an uneasy silence. The lobby's polished marble floor reflected a scene of quiet abandonment. Half of the reception chairs lay empty, and the display cases that once held gleaming product prototypes stood empty or dusty. I carried my briefcase in one hand and the final folder in the other, each step echoing against the walls in a way that underscored how thoroughly the landscape had changed. My arrival prompted glances from a handful of remaining staff members, their expressions flickering between relief and trepidation. I nodded once, acknowledging the tension that hung over the place like a thick curtain. Upstairs, I found Marla sitting at her desk, drumming her fingers against the mahogany surface. When our eyes met, relief washed over her features. She rose to her feet, clutching a single sheet of paper. He's here, she said softly, nodding toward the glass-walled boardroom. Dorian is waiting. The others are in the next room. I thanked her and entered the boardroom, where a circle of uncomfortable chairs faced a broad conference table. Mira sat at the head, looking small in an oversized blazer, her hair pulled into the same bun she'd worn at the hotel. Dorian stood by the window, arms crossed, but his usual smirk was gone. He seemed hollowed out, as though he knew his position was untenable. A handful of executives clustered in the far corner, whispering with furrowed brows. Investors lingered by the door, watching me like predators evaluating whether to strike. I placed the final folder on the table, its weight a silent reminder of every investment I'd made and every sacrifice I'd endured. Then I opened my laptop and projected the summary I'd prepared, a concise breakdown of capital contributions, a timeline of cancellations, and the terms of the bridge loan agreement. The slide that detailed Dorian's termination stayed on screen longest, the text stark against the white background. I looked up at him. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Mira cleared her throat, voice wavering. We've reviewed your proposal, she began, and we're prepared to comply. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. No one expected her to concede so fully. She glanced at me, eyes pleading forgiveness. I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately. I will sign the repayment agreement in full, with the bonus you specified. Dorian's contract will be terminated with the agreed severance. I accept your seats on the board and the audit committee, and I understand we'll appoint an independent financial controller. As she spoke, I observed each reaction. Relief softened some faces, while others froze in indignation. Investors scribbled notes. Legal counsel leaned in to whisper with Marla. Dorian's shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the floor. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a flicker of something unexpected, sorrow for the ruinous path we'd taken. When she finished, I stood and closed my laptop. "Thank you," I said simply. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. This isn't just about restoring operations. It's about acknowledging accountability for the humiliation I endured, for the structure I provided, for the trust that was broken. I met Myra's eyes. "Your apology is on record, and your actions will honor it." A board member cleared his throat. "What is your plan moving forward?" he asked, voice cautious. I opened the final folder and handed him a printed roadmap, 3 pages outlining the restructuring timeline, milestones for fundraising, and benchmarks for executive performance. "We'll stabilize liquidity through the bridge loan, then pursue a Series B with new investors who align with our vision," I explained. "We'll streamline operations, reduce overhead, and rebuild staff morale through transparent leadership. The independent controller will audit past expenditures and recommend best practices. We'll institute quarterly reviews for executive conduct to ensure accountability." Questions followed about projected revenues, marketing budgets, product roadmaps, but I answered each with clarity, drawing on the deep knowledge I'd accumulated over years of silent stewardship. With every response, I felt the cushion of respect grow beneath me. It was a far cry from the moment I'd been escorted out by security. Now I commanded the room. When the meeting adjourned, Mira approached me as others scattered toward their offices. She offered me a small envelope. "This is a letter," she said softly. "I asked Marla to give it to you." I opened it and withdrew a single sheet of heavy parchment. Her handwriting was looped and precise, the ink still damp with intention. I read, "You were the frame to every photo. I hung them up and forgot who held them together. I am sorry for letting you become invisible." I felt the words settle into my chest like a warm ember. I folded the letter and placed it in my jacket pocket. Myra's eyes brimmed. "I know it doesn't fix everything," she whispered, "but it's the truth." I nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. Then I turned toward the door, folder in hand. Investors and executives paused to offer tentative handshakes and polite nods. I accepted each greeting with a calm smile, feeling the weight of my isolation lift with every introduction. Passing Dorian, I held out my hand. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine. For a moment, I saw regret in those dark depths. He took my hand, and our grip was brief but honest. "Thank you," he mouthed, no sound escaping his lips. Outside the boardroom, I inhaled deeply, the recycled office air tasting sweeter now that we'd confronted the past. The halls felt alive again, as though the company had exhaled after a long nightmare. Staff members re-emerged from corners, some offering shy smiles, others nodding in respect. Marla caught my eye and gave a small thumbs up. Her loyalty had endured through fear, and now it shone in her quiet confidence. I paused at the reception desk and watched the prototype displays, a new line of wearable tech humming with potential. In that moment, I realized that the true reckoning wasn't simply the money I reclaimed or the board seats I secured. It was the restoration of integrity. We had stripped away the facade and discovered that beneath it lay purpose and promise. I straightened my jacket and continued down the hallway toward my former office, the final folder pressed against my side as though it were a compass guiding my way. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with negotiations and deadlines and the occasional echo of past betrayals. But I also knew that, for the first time in a long while, I was steering the ship rather than following in its wake. And as the office doors slid closed behind me, I felt the quiet triumph of a man reclaimed, no longer a forgotten supporter, but a visible architect of his own destiny. 2 weeks later, I found myself at the threshold of SoulWeave's modest office, a converted storefront with brick walls painted in warm neutrals, string lights overhead, and a single sign declaring SoulWeave, weaving solutions together. It was a far cry from the marble lobbies and glass towers I'd left behind, but something in its simplicity called to me. I carried a manila envelope tucked under my arm. Inside, the investment agreement I designed to give this small startup the runway it deserved. I stepped inside, the gentle hiss of the door announcing my arrival. A woman looked up from a cluster of soldering irons and circuit boards on a workbench. She paused, eyes widening in recognition. "Is that?" she began, voice catching. It is. You're the guy from Nexera, right? The one they humiliated. I offered a small smile. That's me. I extended the envelope. I'd like to invest. She blinked, uncertainty flickering across her features before melting into gratitude. I don't know what to say. I gestured to the chair behind me. Just sit. Tell me where you need support. She slid into the seat, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm Ava, she said, voice soft but firm. I've been working on sustainable fiber synthesis, plant-based polymers that mimic spider silk. I pitched it to Mira and her team years ago. They laughed it off as a hobby project, said it didn't fit their brand narrative. I kept going alone, cobbling together equipment, teaching myself structural modeling on nights and weekends. I nodded. Persistence pays. I placed the envelope on the table. This will cover your next 18 months of R&D, equipment upgrades, and pilot manufacturing. Her eyes filled with tears. You're giving me everything I asked for years ago. I'm giving you what you earned, I said. Your idea had legs. I regretted not supporting it before. Ava exhaled, relief evident in her slumped shoulders. She opened the envelope and skimmed the agreement. Terms fair, no hidden clauses, interest rates designed to foster growth rather than extract profit. When she looked up, her smile lit the room brighter than the overhead lights. Thank you, she said simply. I leaned back, watching her unfold the possibilities before her. I'd like to be a silent partner, I added. I'll advise when needed, but this is your vision. She nodded, conviction shining in her eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next hour, we talked shop, polymer matrices, supply chain challenges, pilot batch targets. She showed me prototypes, fine threads that glinted in the afternoon sun, strong enough to support weight but soft to the touch. I held one strand between my fingers, feeling the tensile strength she had coaxed from humble plant matter. It was remarkable. When our meeting ended, Ava walked me to the door. She paused in the entrance, turning back. You okay? She asked, as though testing whether I belonged in this world of startups and scrappy entrepreneurs. I looked around at her workspace, tools neatly arranged, whiteboards covered in formulas, a stack of journals containing her experimental data. More than okay, I said. I feel alive. She smiled, and I realized it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in weeks, untainted by fear or obligation, born of gratitude and shared purpose. I slipped out into the street, the sun warm on my back. I felt lighter than I had in months, no longer tethered to the ruins of the old company, but propelled forward by the promise of something new. Over the next several days, I checked in on SolWeave's progress. Ava sent weekly updates. Images of new reactor prototypes, video clips of fiber strength tests, notes on regulatory filings. Each email carried an undercurrent of excitement, reminding me of the thrill I once felt helping build Mira's company. But here, every success was shared, every challenge met with collaborative problem-solving rather than ego-driven directives. One morning, I walked into Ava's lab unannounced. She looked up from the microscope and grinned. Hey, you, she said. I was just about to run fiber alignment tests. Want to see? I nodded eagerly. She invited me to a workbench where a small spool of fiber awaited. She threaded it through a digital tensiometer and with a flourish pressed start. The device hummed, measuring tensile strength as the fiber stretched. The readout climbed higher than previous tests. Ava raised her eyebrows in triumph. That's over 1.2 gigapascals, she said. Stronger than steel. I whistled softly. You've done it. She looked at me, pride shining in her eyes. We did it. Her use of we resonated deep within me. I realized that I was no longer the isolated financier or the sidelined husband. We were partners, collaborators. I smiled, feeling the warmth of true camaraderie. That evening, as I walked back to my studio apartment, I reflected on how different this felt from my life with Mira. There were no boardrooms, no orchestrated presentations, no empty applause. There was only purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet satisfaction of shared achievement. I pulled out my phone and drafted a text to Marla, who'd become one of my few confidants, invested in SolWeave. It feels right. I pressed send and slipped the phone into my pocket. The city lights flickered on around me, but they no longer represented the hollow glamour of a world that had rejected me. Instead, each one was a beacon, a reminder that there were untold stories waiting for someone to believe in them. And as I strolled through the neighborhood, I understood that I wasn't just escaping Myra's world. I was weaving a new one, thread by thread, powered by integrity, respect, and the unwavering belief that true success is built together. I glanced down at my phone as I stepped into the modest cafe, the worn leather case feeling warmer against my palm than any boardroom's polished countertop. Mira was already seated at a small, round table by the window, the morning light catching the gold flecks in her coffee and the tear tracks still faint on her cheeks. I lowered myself into the chair opposite her, setting the briefcase between us like a barrier I intended to keep sturdy. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The bustle of baristas and the hiss of espresso machines filled the space, but around our table everything felt hushed, as though time had paused to witness this meeting. Mira reached out and folded her hands on the table, fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me here," she said, voice steadier than I would have expected. I nodded and retrieved the legal papers from my briefcase, their crisp pages outlining the repayment terms for the $97 million I'd frozen. The ink was still fresh. I slid the documents across to her, watching them land with a soft flutter. "These are the final terms," I said. $97 million plus a 10% bonus, to be repaid over the next 2 years, interest-free. You step down, relinquish your equity in operational control, and I receive the board chair position. She picked up the top sheet and ran her fingertip along the signature line. Her gaze flicked up at me, meeting my eyes with an intensity that reminded me of early days when we'd shared a single laptop and a single dream. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll sign." She paused, pen poised like a reluctant bird about to take flight. "But before I do, I need to say something more." I leaned back, maintaining my stillness as she took a breath. "I don't expect this to fix everything," she said, voice soft but determined. "I know I destroyed your trust, and I can't undo that. But I want you to know that I finally see the cost of my ambition. I lost sight of who you are and what you gave me. I hung the pictures of our success on the wall and forgot who built the frame." Her words landed in my chest like a fist wrapped in velvet. I felt the tension loosen slightly, though I kept my expression unreadable. "Your apology is noted," I said. "What matters now is action. The world needs to know the truth." She nodded and slid the repayment and resignation papers toward me, signing them with controlled strokes. Then she reached into her purse and withdrew another document, a short public statement, drafted on my instructions. It read, "To our community, I acknowledge that I relied on my husband's unwavering support and unfounded sacrifices to propel this company forward. I apologize for the harm caused by my silence and mistreatment. I stepped down to make amends and ensure transparency moving forward." Mira handed me the signed letter, her hand lingering on the edge of the table. "Will you release these tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I'll publish at 8 a.m. Eastern." The clatter of cups and the murmur of conversation around us resumed its normal rhythm, and the moment of stillness faded. We both looked out the window, watching pedestrians pass along the street, oblivious to the seismic shift our agreement would trigger. She folded her hands again. "I don't know who I am without the title," she confessed, voice fragile. "But I want to learn." I studied her, bruised but resolute, humbled yet hopeful. "Then learn," I said. "Take responsibility. Find a new purpose. I'll withdraw my support for extending operations in your direction, and you can forge your path from scratch." She nodded, tears welling once more, and offered a faint smile. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with gratitude. I remained silent, allowing the weight of our exchange to settle between us. The cafe's atmosphere felt lighter now, as though honesty had lifted a cloud. I stood, gathering the signed papers and my briefcase. As I walked away, I heard her call my name. I paused, turned, and she mouthed, "Good luck." I offered a curt nod and stepped into the sunlight of a future no longer defined by shared illusions, but by the clarity of truth and the promise of new beginnings. I moved into my new studio apartment the day I finalized the last of the company documents, 10 feet by 12, with a window overlooking a brick courtyard. The air felt different here, lighter, as though it carried room to breathe rather than the stale heaviness of boardroom politics. There were no receptionists to impress, no assistants to fetch coffee, just blank walls waiting for me to leave my mark. I carried in a single cardboard box containing essentials: a laptop, notebooks, my favorite fountain pen, and the silver bracelet I'd meant to gift Mira. I placed the box on the hardwood floor, paused, and then set it aside unopened. I unpacked slowly, arranging books on a shelf, rolling out my yoga mat, hanging a handful of abstract prints I'd picked up at flea markets. Each task felt grounding, a reminder that life continued beyond spreadsheets and shareholder votes. I made coffee on a small hot plate, the aroma filling the room in comforting swirls. As I sipped from a chipped mug, I glanced out the window at the courtyard below: potted plants, wrought iron chairs, and a stray cat weaving through the shadows. It felt like an actual home. In the days that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with stretching and journaling. I tracked daily wins and challenges, setting intentions rather than ticking off endless to-do lists. I spent afternoons meeting with entrepreneurs at local cafes, offering mentorship on financial planning and growth strategies. Their gratitude was genuine and unguarded. No hidden agendas, just people striving to turn ideas into reality. I felt my pulse quicken with each "thank you" and each spark of hope in their eyes. One afternoon, I attended a workshop on social impact investing. The organizer introduced me to a network of investors focused on clean energy, social housing, and educational startups. Their values aligned with mine, profit intertwined with purpose. I spoke passionately about SoulWeave's sustainable polymers and offered insights from my own experiences. A woman in the back, her name tag reading Naomi, approached me afterward. She ran a venture fund that backed female founders in emerging markets. "We need someone with your integrity," she said, handing me her card. "Let's talk." That evening, I returned to my studio, heart alight with possibility. I brewed tea and opened my laptop, drafting an email to Naomi outlining potential collaborations. The silver bracelet sat on the desk beside me, a relic of a past chapter. I reached out, touched the cool metal, and slid it into a drawer. Some gifts are better held for oneself, as reminders of lessons learned rather than unfulfilled promises. News of Myra's empty office filtered to me via a brief text from Marla, photo attached. "Your gift still sits on her desk." I clicked the image. The dark mahogany desk gleamed under soft overhead lights, the unopened box positioned near the center. I stared at it, but the urge to respond vanished. Instead, I tapped a quick reply. No reply needed. That night, I dreamed of boardrooms dissolving into open fields, of colleagues transformed into curious students, and of a man unbound by titles. I woke before dawn, heart steady, and slipped on running shoes. I jogged through the silent streets, the city's pulse a low hum beneath my feet. When I returned, sweat cooling on my skin, I poured water into a glass and sat by the window. The apartment felt alive with fresh possibilities. Over the next weeks, I balanced mentoring sessions with new investment discussions. I listened more than I spoke, asking questions that helped others find their own solutions. I learned as much from them as I shared. Each connection reinforced the belief that success is not measured in headlines or high-rise offices, but in the impact morning, you inspire. An envelope arrived at my door, a letter from Mira. My hand hesitated before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the same gold-flecked paper she once used for press announcements. Her handwriting was smaller now, unhurried. She wrote that the company had reorganized under new leadership, that she was exploring philanthropic work, and that she hoped, someday, we could reconnect without the weight of past mistakes. She closed with, "I wish you peace." I folded the letter and placed it beside the drawer where the bracelet rested. I didn't reply. In that moment, I recognized that closure can come without closure, acceptance without reconciliation. I stood, walked to the drawer, and slid it closed. The studio was quiet but full, every corner reflecting the man I'd become. I poured another cup of coffee, settled into my favorite chair, and opened my laptop. On the screen, an email draft to Naomi awaited. I typed a subject line: collaboration opportunity. Below, I began outlining ideas for a joint fund to support social enterprises. My fingers moved with purpose, guided by experience and tempered by humility. And so I continued, no longer the silent supporter in the shadows, but a visible architect of positive change. The world had forgotten me once, but in rediscovering myself, I realized that I never needed their applause to prove my worth. My conviction, integrity, and quiet determination were applause enough. Tonight, as streetlights flickered on and the city settled into darkness, I felt genuinely at home in my own skin and ready for whatever came next.